Hey, good morning, everybody. It's time for the first coffee talk of day 2 here at HPE Discover. And we're starting off today with some wonderful gentlemen from Aruba with Tom.
Tom Black, Vice President, General Manager of the Switching
I'll
Business.
hand over to you guys and you can get straight into the content.
Hi, I'm Michael Dickman, Lead Product Management for Switching.
And Christian Gilby, Product Marketing.
And I'm looking around the table. We actually do have a coffee chat this morning, so this is good.
First thing in the morning, we all need coffee.
Absolutely. All right, well, hey, thanks everybody for joining. I hope you brought your questions, your hard balls, your soft balls. If it's a fastball, Michael's got to swing at it. All right, so I'm going to guess by now everyone saw the launch of the 8400 this week. So I think we'll focus on that first. So for those of you that may have seen the spotlight, we'll just hit a few factoids on the product. This was a huge piece of work for us as an organization. You know, when we looked at the whole portfolio, we felt really comfortable with the access switching product line, the 5400 chassis going up to about 2 terabit, but we were kind of missing that switch up at the 10 plus terabit range that you could put in the core of the network. So well over a couple years ago, we started the design cycle on this product. As I mentioned in the spotlight, this has had hundreds and hundreds of engineers, well over 600 engineers focused on this. This has been a labor of love. Takes a lot of perseverance and a lot of focus to get to where we are here this week. So really proud of the team. I think the things that are really relevant to understand about the 8400 are that while it is an incredible 19 terabit packed into 8RU sort of package, and we can talk about the system design if you guys have technical questions later, but kind of the real story is the operating system. So we like to say AOS-CX is the first network operating system built for operators. So the way we designed this is we had a 20-year source code base and solid layer 2, layer 3 protocols, but we really wanted to create a modern platform to take us into kind of the mobile and IoT era. So what we did is we lifted up those protocols and really built from a ground up a massive cloud application that is known as our network operating system. The protocols, if you will, are applications that run think of them as microservices in that cloud application, and that's really packaged up and delivered to you in the form of a switch. The really interesting thing about that we didn't have time to talk about yesterday is AOS-CX is not just APIs for API's sake or everybody's got an API story. We actually, the fundamental architecture of the product is everything in the switch is in a data model and a database schema and held in that in-memory state database. So as part of the compile time, we actually auto-generate REST APIs for every variable object state you can imagine in the data model. So all APIs are actually done not by humans as an afterthought, but actually done as part of the build system at compile time. So it really is API first, and all the various different applications that run in AOS-CX really rely on that data model and that pub sub cloud sort of approach to building distributed systems to work together. So the whole thing again, ground up cloud application. I've briefed probably 40, 50 customers prior to Discover, and it's been received, 8400 platform kind of from a speed specs, received really well. AOS-CX, whether it's CTOs, VPs of networks, technical people, people really get it. So I've been cross-examined by some really smart people that I appreciate, really smart customers worldwide, and the architecture and the approach really resonates. But as we talked about yesterday, the one innovation, if there's kind of one thing you remember about what we're doing here this week, the one innovation that we really decided to make the tip of the spear and how we were going to go tackle the core of the network was something we've branded Network Analytics Engine, or NAE. What NAE is it is another application that runs in AOS-CX that sits on top of that data model, uses those APIs to basically monitor, analyze, kind of reprogram if necessary any of the attributes in the operating system on the fly. So you can really think of it as you've got real-time analytics happening in the network as things happen. So you take as we were talking about yesterday, you take a typical sort of use case that would happen in a campus network. You've got a transient outage in a building, potentially a spanning tree loop, interfering with UCC traffic. Normally what happens is network operations says, okay, they try to go pull logs out of systems, try to figure out what might have happened at 9:04 a.m. when everyone got in the office and got going. This is different. This is real-time monitoring and analytics running on the box all the time, recording what's happening. And so at 9:04 a.m. when you had that outage, data was collected, potential remedial actions were taken as part of the monitoring policies to fix the issue. And so network operations isn't doing retroactive kind of human-machine sort of troubleshooting. The software is doing constantly monitoring and doing the troubleshooting for you. So that's really the focus of Network Analytics Engine. One of the things that, again, we didn't have time to talk about yesterday is the NAE is actually user extensible. So there's on the hard drive, on the management, on the route processors, there's a safe directory where customers can upload their own Python scripts, their own policies. Those scripts actually, if you use the format we suggest, they'll actually auto-generate web pages in the GUI. So you don't have to design new GUI pages. You get them when you put the script on the box. And with those scripts, you're able to customize what you want to see. So you might want to, look for BGP peers gone down and then do a show tech, or then walk the rib or the fib, dump some data. Whatever you think is relevant to your use case, what you want to monitor for, and what you want to do when those triggers happen, you can customize it with your own scripts. And what we're doing is we're actually building a community on our Airheads portal and recipes in our what's called our ASE, is a piece of the Aruba website, but kind of a place where network operators can share their scripts together. So you have people kind of building on each other's knowledge, leveraging scripts. Obviously, every release will continue to add more capabilities, more events that we find interesting for customers. Our technical support can obviously add scripts as well, but really that user community should pick up over time, and you'll see some common knowledge about, oh, hey, you had that kind of problem, here's a script I used to monitor for that event or take action. So, Michael? Yeah, go ahead. Got a question? Good.
All right. Just out of curiosity, I know Salesforce has a similar thing, right? With everything that they have. Thwack has something that they do. Is this something that you could see opening up to a marketplace, just out of curiosity, so people can monetize some of the scripts that they're... I mean, listen, I'm an airhead, and I totally appreciate the community. However, if I take the time to write a script that does something pretty spectacular, any thoughts there?
We actually haven't looked at a business model like that. Certainly, someone could create scripts and sell it to their buddies on eBay.
Highest bidder.
Yeah, you get the USB stick and in the postal, little posted U.S. Postal Service.
5 1/4 floppy disk.
Yeah. Oh, hey, no, that's a low blow. But no, we actually hadn't thought about that. But who knows what could come about?
Yeah, just to add a little bit there, we can show you a demo at the booth later if anyone hasn't seen. But the scripts can actually be remarkably short and very, very easy. And so one of the premises around... Hello?
Yeah.
Sorry. And one of the premises of the way we did it is basically to make this as accessible as possible to network operators who aren't today programmers. And so that is actually part of the way we thought of it, is just to make it as easy as possible to enter this world of, you can call it API-based programmability, or you can call it, automating the kind of manual troubleshooting that's been done in the past with as low of a bar as possible. And so far, that's our approach.
And I mean, I talked to him yesterday about integrating it with IFTTT. Something ridiculous. Turn on your Hue lights when you have a network problem.
Okay.
But it's
so one of the guys on the floor did that. So he said, hey, come here, watch. I got a script on a show at Discover. I said, what? He said, I take the interface down, it turns the lights on at my house. And he showed me his Nest camera in his house, and it did that. But honestly, most of these scripts, to Michael's point, are really short, right? So that UC&C demo that we're doing out there, that's 10 lines. Because what we did, part of NAE is we built libraries for really common functions. Think of almost like, if you're a spreadsheet user, you've got some average, blah, blah, blah. So we built, there's a whole arsenal of things that you get to call in your script. So it's not like you have to invent everything on your own from ground up, right?
No, and on the opposite side, and I've asked this question, I think, to every person that I've talked to about the 8400 is, as far as licensing goes for this, I just want to make it clear, since we're recording things now, But that's no, because no one's heard me ask the question. But this is included. This isn't some weird license feature that you add onto it. This is you get the 8400. This functionality is built into it. There's nothing extra you have to add to it.
That's correct.
That's awesome. Good job.
Yeah, go.
Okay, thank you. So now that we have a lot of host PC devices like tablets and cell phones, is the software ready for making changes on the fly, and or do you have any specific strategy for these post PC devices?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I think, right, so being in the core of the network, this is basically where all the traffic is coming through. And one of the things, I think maybe Kirti referred to this, is we try to, as Aruba, always start out with this like mobile cloud IoT era. And maybe I'll make it like specific with some examples, and hopefully that'll address the question. One of the things we've seen with mobility is an explosion in, say, like mobile UC, mobile Wi-Fi, mobile collaboration. And so that management of that voice network we think is more complicated. And so that's one of the examples where we think you need to have more granular troubleshooting end to end. I think IoT is one where, at least from my customer conversations, has been even more painful than talking about the mobile devices in the core. And the reason for that is a lot of our customers are having a Vlan explosion. So what's happening is someone will come and say, okay, I just bought this new sprinkler system and I need to connect it. And someone else comes in and says, I just want to connect my HVAC system. We even had a request for a connected fire extinguisher. I don't know if I told you about this one. And as the networking team doesn't know what to do, by default, they're creating new VLANs. And this is creating complexity. It's creating segmentation questions, management questions, consistency questions. And for you to have central visibility to that, that is absolutely an unsolved problem. And so the way we've built this can do, exactly what VLANs are running, instant refresh. You can do correlation with config changes. You can see across the if this then that framework. And so, at least from my perspective, the mobile side will be a lot more on the complexity and volume of traffic that's going through, and the IoT is around the visibility and network complexity that's starting to arise, even on the wired and wireless side. And we've definitely considered that. And then, of course, the speeds and feeds is affected as well, but maybe that's sort of a secondary point. But I'd say the main point will be that visibility, troubleshooting logic from a more mission-critical, harder to manage traffic on the mobile side, and this very big challenge of visibility on the IoT side.
Yeah, I'll jump on and I'll give you a slightly different answer. Okay, so if you go back 15 years to before the mobile tablet era, you go back to PC era, client server, right? Applications were built. Maybe people around the table did it with environments like Visual Studio for Microsoft, right? So what you did is you took everything you needed for an application, you compiled the bits, and you delivered something that had to get installed on a system, and that's what you got, was just that application. And someday if someone built a new version of the application, you'd reinstall it, and away you go. So you had these huge monolithic apps, okay? That's what most of the network operating systems in the market are like today. They're just a big monolithic app that let you, kind of stimulate the CLI on top, and the bits happen on the bottom, right? AOSCX is very different. It is really, if you will, a disciple of the modern cloud era, of the tablet era, in that it isn't a monolithic application. It's a framework from a kind of a computer science distributed systems perspective that small applications are added to, and both in the first release and over time. That collection of applications is what we call AOSCX, but it's not. Its design center it's intended to be a piece of software that other software can integrate with for their own purpose. It's not a human-machine first design center. It's a machine-machine first design center. So it's meant to be, I think I used the term on stage, network as a microservice, right? It's meant to offer up a bunch of capability, just like if you had, a billing microservice, or you had, some other component you were using to build your web application or your cloud application. AOSCX was really designed to be just a component in a larger software stack. So, of course, we'll integrate it with our own software platforms, right? You've heard talk this week about ClearPass and Yara and our cloud platform, those kinds of things. But from a customer operations, I was with a large systems integrator yesterday that has many divisions, things in healthcare and other areas, and they have a full stack that they bring out as solutions, right? So AOSCX becomes this very natural component in a stack of many other things. It could be other networking components. It could be medical gear, operational applications, et cetera, et cetera. So its design center is that cloud and tablet era, again, really meant to be integrated with other software for software's sake, if you will.
Yeah. Another question. Oh, that's fine. So now that we have the analytics and we have the API, do you have any use case when you can use machine learning and artificial intelligence for making changes on the network without any human interaction?
Yeah. So I'll give you one that you'll see happen from us. So I think hopefully you saw us talk about Niara yesterday, which is kind of a day 2. It's not a perimeter security. It's machine learning AI for monitoring when things could have gone wrong, within your network. The average security breach runs about 140 days plus in an enterprise before it's detected. So Niara is a platform that gives you the ability to detect those breaches early on and then figure out what you want to do with it. For security applications, for machine learning to work, they need data, they need sensors, okay? So when you think about streaming all the data that's going through the network up to a machine learning application, that's a daunting amount of telemetry. That's a lot to wade through. So typically what you'll see is these kinds of machine learning apps want to see a set of things. But what's powerful with Network Analytics Engine is, again, right, it's meant to be integrated with other pieces of software. As a platform like Niara starts to detect an anomaly, it can immediately go to the core switch and start to window in on the telemetry it wants to see next. So it may have been gathering DNS queries across hosts before, for example. I'm just making this up, right? But and all of a sudden it detects a host is TCP sending, all the servers in the data center. That's a strange thing. So now you want to zoom in on that host. You really want to see all the traffic on that host, not just DNS queries. You want to understand exactly what that host is doing. So that ability for software, the machine learning software, to decide where it wants to go deep and automatically get that from the 8400 and then figure out what to do. It could, in that case, it could actually signal to ClearPass to re-auth that client, and the auth fails and we boot that client off the network. That's just an example of a very simple closed loop machine learning to deeper visibility from the network to remedial action to thwart potential security breach.
And then I'll just add a little bit on the operations side. I think also we're keen to learn from our customers, because so far what we've heard, the feedback is a lot of interest in automated troubleshooting and recommended remediation, but not to automate remediation. But actually the system can automatically revert configuration or make adjustments. And so this is actually something that we're really looking forward to seeing, what the market wants in terms of true automated remediation versus recommend it and then let the human take that next step. But from a technology perspective, both are available.
Yeah, show and do are just two different APIs.
Yeah. Thank you.
So a little disclaimer here, I'm a virtualization guy, so when I hear we've got a new core switch out there, I'm thinking speeds and feeds, talking directly to like a Synergy chassis, and going out to the edge with wireless pieces, that's literally somebody else's problem, okay? So the first question that
Michael, we're somebody else's problem.
Okay. Just disclaimer, framing that up. So, but the idea of a nice new API-driven core switch has a lot of appeal. Being able to displace some of the competitors, there's some appeal to that. But we're also seeing a shift with all of the, you call it NSX or ACI or any of those that are the overlay networks that give us more and more of the programmability, not just from a VLAN instantiation, but the whole, I don't even have to plug things in a second time or because it's already done. I'm doing close networks or leaf spine, however you want to call them. Where does this fit in? And if we've got the wireless controllers on one side of the Aruba product sheet and I've got a core switch on the other side, what are we doing for both the distribution and top of rack stuff? Is that on your roadmap or is that still HP Networking's bailiwick?
So the Aruba portfolio is campus core, distribution, access, right, from a switching perspective. In data center, we partner with Arista. So right now, we don't have ambitions to take the Aruba portfolio inside the data center. We trust our partner to fulfill that particular place in the portfolio.
I have a question. So it's kind of along the same lines he was talking about. With the new OS, when you're talking core switching, you're talking reliability, stability. What kind of mechanisms have you put in place for building the new OS, for one? Like, what has that been through? Was that based mostly on Aruba OS or on some HP OS brought into it? What do you do to stabilize that? And then what kind of testing, what kind of mechanisms have you put when you're doing all of this integration with a lot of different third-party? What are you doing to protect that core switching? Because when you're core switching, that's really the most important thing it's supposed to be doing. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, sure. So we did architecturally, it's not just a cloud application. From a development methodology, it's a cloud application. Okay, so when a developer checks in a piece of feature code or a bug fix, they actually check in the test cases for that feature code or the bug fix at the same time. So it's continuous integration and test. It's not CI/CD like a website, right? You can't just update, your public facing. If you have a website, you can update the code at will, and as people go to it, they get the new version, right? This is different. The bits have to ship, but short of shipping the bits, we have a continuous integration and test model in for AOS CX. I was fortunate in that the organization had made a significant investment in automation in general. So I have a massive global data center that we do automated tests, not just for the 8400, but for the whole portfolio, including even interop with other people's gear. So it's a complete lights out layer 1 through 7 data center with hosts and clients and test sets, products of every sort. You can build very complex topology. So one of the things we've got a good reputation for is software quality and hardware quality in the switching products, and I'd like to really credit kind of the development methodology and the automated test that has been they've been really key to making that happen. So the 8400, the kinds of test cases we have, our ability to test it with kind of black box software on the system evolved and is different than in the past for us. But that kind of automated end-to-end test, that's in our DNA, it's in our genes. And so AOS CX was just the next iteration of that sort of approach.
On the OS itself, I just want to make sure we touch to that question. So we've taken a lot of the existing kind of investment around protocols, but the infrastructure is really what's newer. And I was hoping you could talk about the state database and some advantages of high availability through that model.
Yeah, so I'll describe it briefly, and then I'll give you something that happened in our production beta, just as a use case. So we talked about the data model, the database, the schema having all state. So if you're say a spanning tree protocol, everything about the current state of every port or every port in every VLAN, right, for something like PVST, is held in the database. So if you crash, if you have a bug, when you restart and that daemon comes back up and runs, it reattaches to the database and it sucks its last known operational state out of the database and just keeps going. So actually in our production beta, we went into a large school district, and turns out there was between some of the Windows clients and a fairly early version of the code, there was a bug in the DHCP server. And the DHCP server was actually crashing a few times a day, and other than the syslog, no one knew it happened, because it would crash, come right back around, reattach the database, get its last known good state, and away you go. Now, in a core switch, to your example, high availability is table stakes, right? Some people do it better than others. But this is where the software architecture has an intrinsic advantage. So in old network operating systems, when you did a switch over from the primary route processor to the secondary, typically what happened is all the layer 2 protocols would sync their state. So spanning tree would talk to spanning tree, and layer 3 to layer 3, and port manager to port manager. All these applications are trying to sync everything across from primary to standby, and that kind of decoupled nature of trying to make that switch over hitless takes a long time to stabilize in the field. So most NOSes got to real HA either after many years from first attempt, right? This is where AOS CX has a distinct architectural advantage. So rather than have the applications on the primary and the standby sync, what do? We use 20-year-old technology or computer science to do database replication. So what happens is, on the primary, the active database is actually replicating its state to the standby, just using database replication. And we hold all the control plane applications on the standby, we hold them at boot time. Okay, so when we switch over from primary to standby, all we have to do is let those guys go. And as soon as they fire up, they attach to the database, they extract a known state, and they're up and running. It's now the new primary. So actually there's no difference between a process restart because of a bug or a switchover. Architecturally, the applications don't know. All they know is I come up, I attach the database, I get my last known good operational state, and I'm off and running. So HA is actually intrinsic in the architecture of AOSCX.
And just for completeness on the hardware side, because there are some table stakes expectations there, we do have redundancy in all the hardware elements. So we have redundant fabric, redundant power, redundant management modules, redundant fans.
Yep.
And so on the hardware side as well, it's, I don't know how many nines, you'll have to talk to that, but it's
if you look at a core internet router from any of the prominent companies, you look at our partners, some of our partners' core data center switches, they'll have, at this point in time, they tend to have a similar architecture from a carrier class perspective, and AOS, the 8400, I would say is as modern gets in a core system architecture.
Do you see pushing this OS to the other switching models, or is it just going to stay with the 8400?
We'll look at that over time. Right now, the design center was let's get into the core of the network. Let's do it really, really well. Stay focused, deliver. I think I don't know if the demo's on the floor, but we're doing things to integrate NAE with the REST interfaces on the rest of the switching portfolio. So you can start to do analytics and take action across both access switching and core switching. So I think one of the demos I saw last Thursday, maybe you were even, I saw it from Christian, was detect the voice over IP queues, had backed up in the core. The 8400 would call the REST API and the access switches, kick off an IPSLA probe, get the MOS scores for the Skype calls, bring that back to the core switch, say that report saved on disk, it's now hyperlinked into the report and NAE for that particular monitoring policy. So we're doing integration more from a workflow perspective. We'll look at where the OS goes at farther down the road.
And I wanted to follow up on a question on that. And I saw that demonstration. It's fantastic. But is there, and to clarify what we're talking about, and the question I asked the guys out on the floor was, if you take the 8400 and obviously core switch, and you take the access switches that are out at the edge, the data that's being fed back into the core switch, the core switch acts as that master aggregator to the big troubleshooter, the big brain on Brad, the access layer switches that are coming in, is that a real-time feed that goes back in, or is that just like a query to go out to the access switch, grab a piece of data, bring it in, or is there something that's going to be set up or that is already set up so that you can get real-time data from those access switches to feed back into the core switch?
I'll start and let Michael finish.
Okay.
It depends on how you define the policy, what you want to do. It's kind of your option, but maybe you.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the main answer. Is it depends. I think one thing we're not doing is we're not going to make the core switch like a new network management system for everything. So just in terms of what to expect, where we'll be focusing on is those operations and troubleshooting workflows. And in that regard, we expect in some cases you'll have API calls that are real-time streaming data from the edge. In other cases, only if there's an event, like the if this then that.
Yes.
Only if we have an event and we need that data will we go out and get that. And at that time, it'll be real-time and streaming.
Okay, and that's to use your example of working with Niara, so that Niara can trigger an event, say, hey, there's an anomaly, there's something going on. Open up a stream to come in and bring all that live data, and that's more because I see what you're saying. Making an NMS box is not. False.
No, we're not redoing NMS.
Yeah.
we actually have a really good NMS platform called Airwave, right? So,
yeah, right.
we're not redoing that. You had a question, sir?
So, from a enterprise architecture perspective, one of the difficult things when a cool new product comes on the scene is saying, this isn't, from the stage was announced, you can go catless. There won't be, you can get rid of Cat OS or Catalyst switches out of your core. One of the primary drivers for keeping that stuff in the core is that large enterprises like single vendors to get their entire network stack from. It's just part of the architecture and the engineering and the operations. What's the core value, to borrow a term, what's the core value of displacing my all Cisco network with a Aruba core and a Cisco top of rack and other access layers?
Yeah, so let me reflect a little bit of some of our customer conversations, and then I'll come back to the broader kind of business question. What we've seen from customers is in the past, I think they said, I'm going to make a Wi-Fi decision, then I'm going to make a campus switching decision, then I'm going to make a data center switching decision. What we're seeing more is a customer saying, I want to decide for this building how I want that architecture to run to deliver the best experience for my users. And in practice, what we've seen is rather than one vendor at this layer and another vendor at this layer. We're starting to see one vendor in this building and another vendor in that building. And that is a much more common model that we're seeing for that operational consistency and user experience. And I think it's because of some of those trends that the question over here referred to around mobility and IoT, where to have that consistent operational model within the same kind of physical location is now making more sense than a broad-based layer-by-layer silo decision. And especially speaking from Aruba, we view wired and wireless as two different ways things could access. Like you could be over copper, you could be over fiber, you could be over a radio, etc. But these are all different users and devices, and so we're actually spending a lot of effort and time to unify that experience. So like at the access layer, and then how that integrates with the core. So that's one point. I think the other point would be a lot of these situations, the core switch is very, very old. And in fact, any new switch from any vendor would be running a different OS than it runs today. And so that's just kind of pragmatically, there's not, the 15-year-old OS that might be there today is not necessarily the OS that you would get, from a new device from any vendor. So that's a consideration. And then the last point around the switch is we really have spent a lot of time thinking about how it fits into the architecture. So like you heard the Niara examples, Airwave will be monitoring the switch, how we're tying those REST APIs kind of natively into the access layer. All of those are building out this entire mobile-first architecture that extends from the user up rather than from the wired core down. And so really focused on that user and IoT experience. And we've spent a lot of time on that architecture. So what we'll expect is customers will be making a decision if what's important to them is mobility and IoT, those kind of things, then we would expect them to make building level decisions. And if what's important to them is here's my traditional organization of teams around layer by layer, then it may be different. But we're certainly seeing a shift in our customer base towards what are those new disruptive trends and having a single vendor per building.
Yeah, I'll tack onto that a little bit. So first off, I think the 6500 is probably I think it's the most successful networking product ever in history, right? So there's a lot of them out there. Keep in mind, the vast majority are capped out at about 80 gigs a slot if you put DFCs on them, right? So they are long in the tooth. Again, phenomenal platform, but as Kirti said, it's time it retires. In fact, Cisco itself tried a couple times to move 6K to 7K, and they've kind of gone back and forth with what really is the lead pin or the lead product at that place in network. But you can almost look at your question a different way, sir, which is I've got a bunch of customers that said, look, I've got you everywhere. I just need to get that one last thing out of my network because I want you there too. What can you do for me? That's why we built the 8400.
So it sounds like you've got, with the new switch, some great on-box visibility. Is there also a way to get a full picture of network state, or is this more about having that deep analytics box by box?
So again, we will rely on our platforms like Airwave, Niara, et cetera, to give you that full network view. So again, AOSCX really it's a box level thing. Where to the chat we were having earlier, where the line blurs a little bit is it can actually call into other applications or call into other switches to do things, right? So again, it's how you choose to deploy your NAE agents. But in general, full network visibility state, that's the responsibility NMS, not a switch.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Keith asked you guys a question and said, what makes this a core value? And you guys basically said, because it's new. That's cool. I mean, that's a good reason to upgrade, right? But I think I want to elaborate on that a little bit more. As far as cross-compatibility and functionality-wise, I think the thing, Keith, that I got out of that was that if you go back to what they were saying before, it's a machine-to-machine box. It's not necessarily a user machine box. So would it be a fair statement to say that one of the reasons that it makes a good play is because it can work with other equipment that's in your data center? So, I mean, and is that a fair statement? I mean, the Niara software, you can, like we're talking about opening up those data streams from access level devices. Doesn't matter if it's a Cisco device or a Juniper device or a Brocade device or whatever. It's APIs or APIs.
Yeah, so certainly we always do the open standards. We'll work with multi-vendor, and then the API calls, to the extent that they're well-structured API calls, will work in and out. And then also just where you started, we wouldn't say I wouldn't say our core value prop is that it's new.
No, I'm just digging at you for fun.
No, which I totally
We're trying to get the
appreciate.
viewer
Yeah.
count up here, man.
Yeah, no, I got it. But it's really what we were talking about earlier, like the advantages around that flexibility, modularity, visibility, automation, all embedded in the network.
Okay.
And then it's kind of like, and oh, by the way, it's 1.2 terabits per line card. You know,
So,
that,
yeah, I mean, a little bit, you know. So, and I had another question, and I asked this yesterday, and it has to do with the, you know, you talk about the on-system database, which I think is, and we haven't talked too much about that, but I found a lot of value in that understanding. I mean, you did touch on it now, how each component is basically a service or a microservice that taps into that database, and so if that microservice fails, it crashes, it comes back up, but the data remains the same. Just to clarify, that's all stored on board. All that is stored on those management modules.
Yep.
And I believe it does have SSD. It's got an SSD. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a quad-core Xeon, 32 gigs of RAM, and I think 128 gig SSD or something along those lines.
And it's you can put dual cards in there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to come back to Keith here. So this is you have to kind of rotate 90 degrees, right? So core switching, right, for decades has been, while it is the transit point of the network and it's where all the traffic is going through and potentially is the richest pin or the richest place in network to harvest information and data, right? It's also the largest failure domain. So the general operational tendency for core switching is, God, don't touch it, right? Get it stable, find a release that works, and then everybody stay away, don't touch it. Right, so you get a change window. It's a 2-hour change window. 1 a.m. on Sunday, and everyone hope and pray that it's okay Monday morning. Right, so the conservatism around interacting with that place in network is just rampant in network operations across the globe. Right, AOS CX is intended again to tilt things 90 degrees, which says it's okay. You can interact with it, software to software. You're not it's not going to crash. You're not going to take your network down. Go ahead and take advantage of not just the stability, the performance of the system, but take advantage of the value, the data that's going through that box, because it's safe to interact with. Does that make sense?
So I guess there's the technical conversation, and then there's kind of the reality when you hit the business. Well, I like probably the best analogy is when I have to create a business case for replacing a core network switch. I can go to this. Normally, this is like in a lot of organizations. This gets to the CIO, CEO level conversation, and they have to make a decision: do I buy a forklift, or a new set of forklifts, or do I buy a new core switch? The core switch that's there today gets me my email that I get today. How does a new 8400 translate into new business opportunity or new business value? Is a lot of the conversation I'm helping network engineers make. So from Aruba's perspective, the software capability of 8400, how are you guys helping these network engineers, network managers make it's a reason why Cat 6500s have been in the core of the network for 15 years. The perceived value of the core isn't there. So how do you help change that perception of value of core network switching?
So I'll start and I'll let Michael finish. So I actually think customers really do value their core. They're just afraid. They've just been afraid to touch it.
So it's a different value. It's the network engine. I'm talking executive. This is
okay.
the network manager. Yeah, he values it. The CEO or CIO that has to approve the risk in the CapEx to move to a new core doesn't necessarily value it. That's a much automation. I understand automation, virtualization. I understand virtualization. Cloud move to cloud. I understand that. From a CFO, CEO, business user's perspective, what's the new value? Because that's who has to approve this purchase in the risk of the migration. So if I'm selling that, what's the value I'm taking into that? What's the tag or value line that I'm taking into that group to convince them that, yes, we're going to spend X tens of thousands of dollars, take on this amount of risk to change something in their mind that isn't broke?
You want to go first?
Sure. So talking to CEO level, It is a good question. It is a good question. Talking to a C-level audience about this, I would say agility and security. Agility is we're hearing from our customers because the core hasn't maybe been touched and had enough attention and so on. It is actually holding back. So maybe I'll give some examples. I talked with a global professional services firm. The core switch was the reason that they were unsuccessful in deploying a kind of new video collaboration conferencing system worldwide. They had a lot of struggles with that in terms of just the creation of the service and going through. And so there's these examples we're hearing where services deployment is slow, and one of the reasons is actually the existing infrastructure. The second part of agility would be that operations troubleshooting. I mean, it's almost like a cliche now. 70% of the cost and time is spent keeping the lights on, and we really think this is going to help address that in terms of network operations, automation, troubleshooting, visibility. Another example, spoke with a university in the West, and they're down to 5 people in the networking team, and they actually have research groups, which is relevant to the president of the university. They got research groups who are complaining about the network team because they can't get what they need to do their research. And the reason is that everything has to be manually set up for these research groups every time they come in. They look at something like the 8400, they actually took it further than we thought, which is to make it even self-service for research groups. So they have that much trust in this. So that like an intelligent, sophisticated research group of a university can now set up their little network sandbox in terms of all the pieces around that, including the core. So that agility piece, I think, is one. And then the second is that security piece. To take it to that next level in terms of really sensor more than enforcer, but really that intelligent sensor, I think to the questions you were asking earlier, that when you need information, you can get it instantly at the granularity you need, sent to the service you want as a co-equal part of that software environment. I think that's going to be key because this really is that center point in the network. And rather than trying to manage all traffic from all points or stream 100% of core traffic, it's really that intelligent security interaction is going to be very helpful with some of the other modern tools. So those are the two pieces I would say at a C level.
So let me...
Yeah, actually, let me tag on that real quick. So the majority of my briefings pre-launch were with CTOs or CIOs. Okay, and I'll tell you how the discussion went. Yep, switch, And as soon as you get to 10AE, Network Analytics Engine, the conversation completely changes. And I'll tell you why it matters to CIO. Because the CIO has got lines of business screaming at him to get this project done, that project done, that, there could be, whether it's corporate UC&C, whether it's improving throughput from an engineering data center to workstations. There's a laundry list of stuff that's happening at that level of the organization, and beyond just performance of the network, the thing where the eyes really open up and where we get phase alignment with that level of an organization again is around NAE, because they can see that the pressure they're under to get some of these projects done and users happy, that cycle is de-risked and compressed with NAE. So they've got the opportunity. They know if something goes wrong now, they'll be able to jump in and more quickly figure out what it is and get it fixed. Because to Michael's point, they'll often try to deploy a project, a major new project, with touching as little of the interior of the network as possible, right? You're just trying to add applications or devices around the edge. But that is now an impediment to getting some of these projects through. So NAE really is where the discussion shifts.
So just a couple of thoughts there. I'm not questioning Aruba's value in this, but just in terms of what I've heard, it could have been Cisco saying the same thing. It could have been another vendor saying the same thing. So just some feedback. I think you have to be a little more clear on your differentiated value as you start to articulate it, so that your competition isn't able just to say the same thing, and then I'm left as an executive going, okay, so who do I believe more? Because that's a roll of the dice, and that kind of gets to Keith's piece. But I would also say we're not talking tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, in most of the infrastructures that I've managed or clients that I've worked with, we're talking hundreds to millions. So it's an incredibly expensive component, and it's not just the capital exposure, it's also the staff and the training and everything else that goes with it, right? All the ancillary pieces. That almost becomes more complicated than just simply replacing one product for another. So just some feedback to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we don't want to do negative competitive campaigning, right? So
I highly suggest that
what
you
we're
do
going
not
to do,
follow in the
Yes.
footsteps of some of your other folks that have gone down that path.
Not in our DNA. So we are very comfortable, though, to your point, just let the software do the actual talking.
And then just the other thing I'd add is we really have focused a lot on the network operators experience. And so in those level conversations, we're getting good feedback. But you're right. I think when you boil it up to just two buzzwords at a C level, it's hard to pick a brand new buzzword no one's ever heard. So that's fair feedback.
Back a little more on the technical. Do you have any plans for something like VSS? I think HP calls it IRF, anything like that. And then what about span limitations, things like that? I know there's kind of basic, but it being a new switch, what kind of limitations do you have there?
Sure, so I'll take the first and maybe you take the second. So on the kind of virtual, I think VSS, you're referring to virtualizing the chassis so that you can have logically managing it as one domain and getting that redundancy fault tolerance benefit. So we call that technology VSF, Virtualized Switch Fabric. And yes, this will be supported in that chassis. And so we'll expect in general, I think, most customers will probably deploy two of these side by side, with VSF in most deployments over time would be our expectation of a typical deployment model.
Span sessions, we'll have to get back to. I forget the exact number, but the question is very, very interesting because it's about that was the troubleshooting tool that came with a bunch of hardware and software limits and what is in the market today. Put span session aside. If your policy says look for this kind of data and copy that packet somewhere else, that isn't constrained by the concept of a span session, so to speak, right? Because a policy-based forwarding, a span in some ways is just a policy-based forwarding decision, right? It's a mirror of a packet, but those kinds of things are just intrinsically available in the software. The exact span session count, though, we'll have to follow up with you.
Hi. One of the things that really got my attention is around the APIs, the idea that every state is actually reflected in existing APIs that exist. I think this creates an immense developer opportunity as well as the project portfolio that you mentioned before. It affects sourcing decisions. It affects the ability to really be able to handle real-time alerts in all of your other monitoring solutions. I didn't feel like that part was built out too well. I'm curious, most of all, in understanding with all this data, all the analytics you have, how much out-of-the-box support do you plan to provide on integration with other troubleshooting and monitoring solutions across the board? Because this could be useful for everything from the obvious, such as network monitoring, where you already have some solutions as well, all the way to, say, IT expense management, sourcing, project and portfolio management, where core switching could be seen as one of the resources associated with anything from cloud upgrades to whatever application projects are in place.
So I think I'm going to let Michael take most of that answer. But just to go back to the first part of your question, you may have seen on the floor we use Swagger to auto document the APIs, right? And so we have scripts already that, and with that technology, you can cross compile the APIs into Python, Ruby, and there's a whole list. I think you see that matrix of about 20 different kind of languages or platforms. And again, as we showed on the floor, one of the things we do already is we auto-generate Google spreadsheet functions for all the APIs, right? So it's just an output of, it's a natural consequence of being a cloud application. You've got that kind of latitude. Deeper integrations with other systems, I think it'll happen over time. But what are you seeing in customer conversations?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's a great question and a very rich area that'll evolve over time. We've already done some examples ourselves of integrations, things, the tools Tom mentioned, things like GitHub or GNS3 or Jenkins, spreadsheets. So these tools are remarkably easy, and I think what we'll do over time is expand the way that we talk about how easy that is, and then also where there is value in a bilateral integration, we could pursue that. I think from my perspective, I want us to be customer-led in terms of which of those integrations add the most value. And so far, I would say the number one integration point that I've heard is actually a homegrown orchestration system that directly leverages the APIs. And then the secondary would be some of these data center type tools around operations automation. And then we'll go from there. I think it's a great point, though.
So I have to get this dig in. This is nothing to do with this, but Amy on Twitter, they said, can you find a way to bring faxing into the conversation.
Well, they were talking about analytics for VoIP. You got to, know if your faxing is working, right? Support T38.
That's an inside joke.
So you do not have to answer that.
Sorry.
Do not have to answer that. Thank you.